My name's Iain and I'm Director of Tyne Archives and Museums. And Tyne Archives and Museums has a reputation for being a museum and archive service. It's really about engagement, inclusion, about access. We focus very much on the difference we make in people's lives. We have obviously very important and significant collections, but the collections are the tools that we use to work with and engage people. Culture Shock's a project that we've been working on now for about 5 years in partnership with Culture Unlimited. And the aim of the project has been to encourage people across the North East to record digital stories reflecting on aspects of their life in the North East. All the stories are inspired by museum collections across the whole variety of museum collections: archaeology, natural history, art and more broad social history. And through the process, people have actually been trained in the use of digital technology. They've acquired some digital skills. And for instance, older people attending a daycare centre have actually learned how to use Apple Mac PowerBooks, how to use digital tape recorders, and how to sort of edit their story and produce a finished product that's now launched up on the web. Incredible diversity of people, from school children to retired people, people living in urban areas, people living in rural areas, employed people, unemployed people, people whose families have been in the North East for generations, along with refugees and asylum seekers who've reached the area very, very recently. One of the amazing things about the project has been how much people have opened up in the stories. People, for instance, who've had a history of mental illness, who've sort of felt for the first time able to share their story and share how they've come through some very difficult times in their lives, and want to really talk to other people about how they've achieved that and made a difference in their own lives. The original idea for the Culture Shock project came from a report that was produced by Culture Unlimited for the Home Office, looking at how museums could contribute to tolerance, to cohesion and to citizenship. And following a conversation with Chris Wood from Culture Unlimited, we began discussing how Tyne Archives and Museums could work to that agenda, which particularly focused on storytelling. And we felt that what we particularly could bring was looking at digital storytelling, how people could create their own online stories, and how that could both provide new interpretation for museum collections, for visitors to museums, but also take museum collections out to a wider audience. So for example, the films that we've produced, we've shown in cinemas, we've shown in shopping centres, we've shown in marketplaces, we've shown on BBC big screens across the region. So a very, very wide range of broadcast outside the traditional places you'd expect to see museum and museum projects. To deliver the Culture Shock project, we've worked with lots and lots of different groups across the region and really depended on key workers in those groups to give us access, for example, to prison aftercare societies and to young people at risk of exclusion from employment, education or training. The groups have been first of all sort of brought together into a story circle type approach, where we encourage people to talk about what's important to them. We've then moved on for that to give them the basic skills they need in using computers. They've scripted a story, edited it, laid down a soundtrack and brought the sound and the images together into a final production, which is about 2.5 minutes of video, which is uploaded to a website with a transcript of the story. And people can also comment on the story, so the website's very, very interactive. And I was looking at it today, and one of our stories has been viewed now 3,500 times, which is a fantastic record for a story out there on the web. For me, one of the most exciting and empowering things about the project has been talking to some of the individuals who participated and how they felt able to share their deep-inmost feelings in ways that they haven't before. Also how people have been able to sort of maybe move out of their own comfort zones emotionally and physically. People who are very used to spending their vast majority of their lives in quite a small geographical area have sort of moved around the region, contributed to large-scale showings where we've brought together perhaps 20 or 30 different stories and shown those to quite a large audience. And some of the people that have produced their digital stories have actually got up in front of that audience and spoken to a large group of people, maybe for the first time in their lives, and really felt empowered to do that. And I think working with the variety of groups, both in terms of the subject matter that brings people together, but also the geographical spread, has been very, very significant. In terms of the difficulties of the project, when we initially set out on the project, we felt that it would be possible to bring people together for a solid 4-day block of time to deliver stories. People don't have time in 4-day blocks, we soon found. Had to really rearrange our timetables and work through that, which made it more challenging to ship equipment around the region 60-70 miles for a different workshop with a different group on the next day. That needed some practical skills and some practical reorganisation, but the benefits of it have been sort of hugely worthwhile. I think also with these sort of projects, it's really important to set realistic targets, and quality has been what's really, really important. So we've ended up with about 550 stories that people can view on the web, and I think are really, really high quality, and to my mind, show what a difference museums make in people's lives. As well as broadening access to museums for people across the region, we've also used Culture Shock to take museums out to a much, much wider audience. And our Culture Shock team have presented to numerous conferences both in the UK and in Europe. We'll be talking about the Culture Shock project at the Museums and the Web conference in America later in 2011. It's been really important to be able to do this advocacy for the benefit of museums and what social impact museums make, particularly in a time of great funding challenges, when I think demonstrating the value of museums is really, really significant. We've learnt a lot in this organisation about how people interact with culture through the project with such a diverse range of people. Culture Shock's had a big impact both on my own organisation and I think on the participants who've been involved. We're talking to some of the people who live in some of the smaller towns and villages in the region, who've going to be coming to the larger cities to share their stories with other people. They've really felt some of their horizons have been opened up. They've been to museums they haven't been to before, they've been to places they haven't been to before, so that we have made a real difference in people's lives. They've also engaged with different cultures through their experience of visiting museums and museum galleries, things that they maybe wouldn't have looked at, or they wouldn't have thought museums were for people like them, and this has been a great opening up project around that. I think the key things on a project like this are to do your research at a very early stage, so you test out the ideas, ideally with some pilots. It's often really hard if you're applying for funding for a project and you don't get the funding until you actually sort of start the project, but anything you can do to pilot it and test it. I think it's really important that you set realistic targets, because if you're sort of driven too much by numerical targets, sometimes the quality can suffer. And I think finally, it's really important that you allow people time to meet their needs, and you allow the agenda to have an element of flexibility in it, because if you're working on a project to deliver benefit into the community, you have to work to what the community needs and not perhaps to your own organisational agenda. Tyne Archives and Museums has had a strong reputation for its access, inclusion and engagement work. What we've been really pleased to do with projects such as Culture Shock and Discovery Revisioning, which is a project we recently completed with Durham University's Centre for Social Justice, is to look at new ways that move beyond traditional consultation. So not just asking people questions in a focus group, getting people to fill in questionnaires, but use more creative techniques for getting people's views and engaging a very diverse range of people, not just in saying what's happening on a day-to-day basis in our museums and galleries, but looking to the future. How do they want to see museums and archives developing? How do they want to shape them? How are those museums and archives going to reflect the needs of present and future communities? And as we move forward into the next 10 years with Tyne Archives and Museums, we want to engage people more and more in our decision-making process and in shaping an organisation that's fit for the future.